Good evening and welcome to The Way Out Show. I'm your host, Dane McCarthy, broadcasting to you from FEMA Region 5 deep in the bowels of the United Police State of America. Today is March 14th, 2014. The big news is unabashedly geopolitical news. And this would be the enormous struggle, which is now no longer in secret, but plain to see for anyone who looks at or reads the news. And that would be the struggle between the Western Empire and the Eastern Empire, represented by United States, European Union, and its NATO allies, and the Empire of Russia, formerly the Soviet Union. And Vladimir Putin has responded to the efforts by nationalists within the Ukraine and various other outside parties who were trying to overthrow and did succeed in overthrowing the elected government of the Ukraine. Vladimir Putin is responding by basically setting his vast resources, military resources, up for at least making a show of pulling Ukraine back into the fold of Russia, of Mother Russia. Now we know, of course, that the Ukraine is at least half Russian, and you have Russian speakers, and they actually support returning to Russia. The other half are, they speak Ukrainian, and they would favor joining the European Union. Now, everything I've read is that the choices that are being forced upon the Ukrainian people are not good, particularly for either side. Either joining the EU would result in the population being forced into very severe austerity measures, which are extremely harmful to the economy and to the personal welfare of the population, just as we've seen in other countries like in Greece, where the austerity is just crushing the people. People are losing businesses, losing jobs, losing homes, breaking up families, increased suicide, homelessness, violence, domestic violence, violence in the streets, just a mess as a result of this very unwise decision to just force every dime out of the people of a particular country. And of course, there are many people who'd like to do that to the United States and expect to do that to the United States at some point down the road, once it gets completely under the thumb of the globalists who own the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. This is the way the playbook, this is how these criminal operations have run for decades. They lend huge amounts of money, and much of that money goes to the leadership who secret it away, they steal it, and not a lot gets accomplished. And then the people have to pay for it, the theft by their own leaders, their own leadership, and the wealthy of the country. As a result, they have to pay back that money that's lent to them with interest. Now, we do see some partial success stories where some of those people, the wealthy people who got the money, actually reinvest that money into the country. So there's a benefit from that, but it's a terrible price to pay for having basically corrupt leadership who robs you blind and then robs you twice, basically. They rob you of your taxes and the infrastructure. They sell off the infrastructure. They sell off the corporations, the roads, the railroads, the natural resources, and then they pocket that money, so the people don't see any of the profits from those sales, and then then not only that, but when the bill comes due, which it always does, by the trumped up interest rates and so on, and the shenanigans and criminality, then they have to pay it again. And this goes on over and over and over and over, and it just keeps people in a perpetual debt slave situation where from cradle to grave they never can get on their feet, they never can get established, they can never go beyond affording the basic necessities of life, if that. And so this is what faces the people of Ukraine, including Crimea, if they were to all go toward the European Union. Now, nevertheless, some people want that because the reputation of the European Union, in some ways, is actually better than the reputation of Russia, the former Soviet Union. Vladimir Putin is simply a throwback to the old ways, the powerful leaders of the former Soviet Union, and even to the days of the Tsar, in which you have an all-powerful leader who controls media. The media is completely controlled by the Putin administration, and no bad news about Putin is ever broadcast. It's always good news on Russian television. This is what I've been reading. And he has come down very hard on free speech, on dissent, and those freedoms which were won as a result of the collapse of the Soviet Union are rapidly disappearing in Russia. So this would be the possible outcome of Ukraine going to the side of the Russians. What Ukraine really needs to do, and the nationalists in Ukraine would totally understand this, and they're fighting for this, but it's an uphill struggle, is independence from either of the two giant global empires. They want to be a sovereign nation. They want to decide what their future would be for their own country by themselves, without interference, without becoming beholden to either side. It's better for a nation to struggle on its own and have a hard time and just be ignored by both sides. And this is sort of what happened in certain countries, like, for instance, Vietnam. After the Americans left Vietnam after the end of the war, and they washed their hands of the whole country, and they stopped trying to help Vietnam. Vietnam struggled and was a poor nation for quite a long time. And they had their communist system, which they put in place. And gradually, the communism part of it fell away because, as typically happens, people gradually realize that communism isn't such a great deal, and they want to have that independence. They want to have personal sovereignty. They want to be able to start a business and not be interfered with by the government. And gradually, the entrepreneurial spirit increased in Vietnam. And Vietnam is still a poor country, but they gradually were able to increase their prosperity, and they're doing a lot way better, way better. And this is what happens when a country is just left alone. We can solve our own problems, thank you very much. Because too often interference from outside isn't in the best interests of the people of that country. There are outside interests, corporate interests, globalist interests who want to exploit or rape the country of the natural resources. So that's a little bit of what is behind today's news concerning Ukraine and the Crimea. And, you know, some people think it may explode into World War III. I don't think that'll happen, but this is one of those struggles, those power struggles that go on in geopolitics. But what I really wanted to do today was to continue on with my investigation of 9/11, and some of you who have already investigated 9/11 will have seen some of these videos, but some of them I haven't seen. They're kind of new, and they're ways of looking at it. Last week we talked about Building 7. We're going to talk a little bit more about Building 7. We're also going to talk about the Twin Towers a little bit, and just look at things from a little bit of a different perspective. One thing that needs to be kept in mind is September 11th, 2001 was the watershed moment in in memory for most people. Now, people my age can remember the assassination of President Kennedy. The people who are my mother's age, who's 91, their defining moment was the bombing of Pearl Harbor, probably the defining moment. And huge events took place as a direct result of the bombing of Pearl Harbor, including the entrance of the United States into World War II. This changed both of my parents' lives, and tremendously. And of course, my life was changed by the killing of President Kennedy, because after that Johnson took over, LBJ, and he ramped up and escalated the Vietnam War and caused untold havoc in my generation for the young men who went to Vietnam, and they never, most of them, many of them are, yet they come back and, they're not the same, they're changed. War kind of does that to people if you survive it. A part of you dies in war, particularly in an unjust war and a war of aggression, which is what Vietnam was. And we saw the same thing happen after 9/11. You had hundreds upon hundreds of thousands of men and now women going to Iraq, going to Afghanistan, and covertly are in many, many other countries around the world. The CIA has its tentacles overthrowing countries, and all in the name of 9/11. Once an American politician, a leader, is pressed on why these policies are happening, if he's pushed into a corner, he will always bring up 9/11. What about 9/11? It could happen again. They could hit us again. They hit us on 9/11. They killed 3,000 people. But the reality is that 9/11, like so many other false flag events throughout history, from way before 9/11, the Japanese, for instance, invaded China. They wanted to invade China. They were expansionists. They had dreams of grand empire, very militaristic. This is in the 30s. They found a way to create a pretext to attack and invade China, and they did it. It was they blew up some trains. Said that the Chinese did it. The trains were Japanese. The Chinese had given the Japanese access to their country via the trains they were building. Boom, somebody blew them up. Well, this has been shown to be over time that this was a false flag. Hitler did the exact same thing to create a pretext to invade Poland and essentially kick off World War II. In the late 30s, dressed some Polish prisoners up in Polish uniforms, shot them, scattered them around, and said that the Poles had tried to attack a German military installation, and therefore he was, in order to protect Germany, invading Poland. And so we saw on 9/11, we saw the destruction of the Twin Towers, Building 7, and the entire World Trade Center complex. More than 3 buildings were eventually, the whole complex was pulled down as a result. But we need to know and understand how that happened. And once we understand how it happened, that the official explanation is so full of holes, so full of anomalies, so full of scientifically impossible aspects, that the alternative that are offered by the so-called conspiracy theories are the only possible explanation. They are actually far more probable than the official explanation for why the Twin Towers fell, why Building 7 fell, and even, of course, the Pentagon. To this very day, some of these answers, the government has never explained most, or I would say virtually all, of these anomalies. And they simply stick with their narrative that they have set up and encased in concrete and written into the history books, and that is it. And it's not going to change. Nothing is going to change. There were 19 hijackers. They stole these planes. They flew them into the Twin Towers. One was overcome by the passengers, and they fell, and they crashed into Shanksville, Pennsylvania, and one crashed into the Pentagon. 4 jetliners. And this, of course, does not hold up. For one thing, at least 6 of those so-called hijackers are still alive. And the FBI has acknowledged this. They know that they're still alive. But they also know that if they were to change their story, then the whole facade the charade would come apart, it would fall apart, and people would say, what, there weren't 19 hijackers? But you have it written right here in this history book. This is history. You're going to change history? Well, they're not going to change history. That's the way it's written, and it doesn't matter if it's wrong. After 9/11, some of those guys called up and said, why is my picture in these pictures, among these pictures of these 19 hijackers? I'm an airline pilot in North Africa. You know, yeah, I was in America 5 years ago and my ID got stolen, or and this type of thing. So the whole thing begins to fall apart. Okay, so I have some video for you. Let's start with the first video. Let's put it up on the screen behind me. This one I think is. We'll just go from that, and I'll make some comments on it, and then we'll go on to the next one. So let's watch the first one about 9/11. It's an excellent video.
Bioterror drill. Spokesman Tom Kenny to Dan Rather.
To be honest with you, we arrived on late Monday night and went into action on Tuesday morning. And not until today did we get a full opportunity to work the entire site other than the spot at Church and Day to which we were deployed.
And Rudy Giuliani, mayor of New York, tells ABC's Peter Jennings that he was aware the towers would be coming down.
What is going on now is a massive rescue effort.
Do you believe it's hundreds or thousands?
I really don't want to say right now, Peter. I think it's going to be a horrible number. I saw people jumping out of the World Trade Center. I saw some of the firefighters who I know going into the building. And we were in a building in which we were trapped for about 10-15 minutes. And we set up headquarters at 75 Barclay Street, which was right there with the police commissioner, the fire commissioner, the head of emergency management. And we were operating out of there when we were told that the World Trade Center was going to collapse. The World Trade Center was going to collapse. It was going to collapse. It was going to collapse.
Similarly, Larry Silverstein, new leaseholder of the World Trade Center, regretfully declared that a decision was made to pull Building 7 by the end of the day, the last structure added to the World Trade Center complex. Let's hear Mr. Silverstein's actual words, delivered for our benefit in the 2002 PBS documentary America Rebuilds.
I remember getting a call from the fire department commander telling me that they were not sure they were going to be able to contain the fire. And I said, we've had such terrible loss of life. Maybe the smartest thing to do is pull it. And they made that decision to pull, and then we watched the building collapse.
Blast, shoot, blow, and pull are terms used in the demolition industry to refer to bringing down buildings, bridges, and other structures.
Because I actually blew the hospital down that I was born in.
Originally, we had figured to shoot it, let it drop straight down.
Then, watch Demolition Dynamics attempt a big blast.
And from Ground Zero's own post-disaster wrecking crew.
By mid-December, the Department of Design and Construction had leveled World Trade Center buildings 4 and 5.
Hello? Oh, we're getting ready to pull building 6.
Silverstein, a commercial real estate tycoon with international political connections, acquired a 99-year lease on the World Trade Center complex in the spring of 2001. Throughout the summer, he reworked the insurance policies on his new property, making sure that it was covered for acts of terrorism. Explicit in the lease agreement was Silverstein's right to rebuild the complex if it were destroyed. After 9/11, Mr. Silverstein fought his insurers in court to obtain double his policy limits for the destruction of his property, maintaining that the double hijacking constituted 2 disasters caused by terrorists, not just one. He won and was awarded over $7 billion, a magnificent return on his original $15 million investment.
My first reaction is to think about the families of those people, the tragedy, the magnitude of it. However, I firmly believe that we should rebuild.
Just in the last few seconds, another building, building number 7, one of the buildings in support of the World Trade Center towers, has collapsed.
World Trade 7, functioning as the command center for the complex, housed giant diesel backup and oxygen systems, the mayor's protected emergency bunker, and offices for the CIA, Secret Service, Department of Defense, and Securities and Exchange Commission. Its other tenants were insurance companies, brokerages, and banks. No plane hit Building 7, but at 5:20 p.m. on September 11th, it collapsed in a heap on the ground. Some damage to Building 7 is said to have been caused by debris from Tower 1. Though this New York Times article tells us Building 7 burned like a giant torch, the only visuals that exist are of unidentified smoke and a few small fires. Compare this to the wallop sustained by World Trade Center 3, 4, 5, and 6. Positioned right below the towers, damage to the surrounding World Trade Center buildings was infinitely worse. Still, the structures held up. But somehow, rescue workers knew that Building 7 would fall.
You hear that?
Keep your eye on that building. It'll be coming down soon.
A 47-story skyscraper, Building 7 folded neatly in 6.5 seconds, a textbook descent right into its footprint. Silverstein Properties now tells us that its owner was referring to the team of firefighters inside the building when he spoke of the decision to pulling the firemen out of harm's way. However, there were no firefighters in Building 7, according to FEMA, NIST, and Fire Chief Frank Fellini. They were ordered out at 11:30 that morning. 6 hours later, the building came down.
You know, we heard this sound that sounded like a clap of thunder. Turned around, it looked like there was a shock wave ripping through the building, and the windows all busted out, and it was horrifying. About a second later, the bottom floor caves out, and the building followed after that.
Radio host Alex Jones notes the mark of a classic implosion.
This is a photo taken 1 second into Building 7's collapse. Notice the crimp. If we look at other controlled demolitions, we see that they first blow one of the central columns so the building falls in on itself. If you don't do this, the building falls outward and can damage surrounding structures. Building 7 had a classic crimp or wedge its central column was blown out first, so it didn't structurally damage buildings just a few feet away from it.
Remember the mayor's emergency bunker? Ensconced on the 23rd floor of Building 7, it was retrofitted with superglass, water, oxygen, and its own generator. But Mayor Giuliani chose to find emergency shelter elsewhere on September 11th. Why Building 7? Even the media and its experts were confused. The History Channel interviews structural engineer Ramon Gil-Sans, who points out the obvious crimp and even speaks of the implosion.
Engineers are not just focusing on the Twin Towers. The most disturbing structural event was not that the Twin Towers fell, but that Tower 7, ignited by flying debris, fell due to fire alone.
Building 7 was a steel frame building and is the first steel frame building that has collapsed due to fire. The failure of the building was an implosion, so it failed completely different than Towers 1 and 2, in which the floors failed first.
Why Building 7? Let's ask the question again. As the WTC Command Center, was it the hub for the 9/11 plan? Also, in 6.5 seconds, lost forever were thousands of SEC case files on corporate fraud, including those relating to the notorious activities of giants WorldCom and Enron. A few indictments for stock fraud, but what of the $70 billion California electricity swindle? It disappeared.
All right, so that was very interesting. That's from 9/11 Mysteries, one of the earlier full-length movies, documentaries made about 9/11. Extremely gripping and informative documentary. Building 7, to this very day, the government claims that it fell due to fire alone. And it's, as the scientist said in the movie, although it didn't seem that he would go so far as to question how odd it would be that it was the first steel-structured building, skyscraper, to collapse due to fire. And none has collapsed since. Although we've had many enormous skyscraper fires, including skyscrapers burning for like 12 hours, the entire thing like a giant torch. Just unbelievable fires in skyscrapers. And because you're talking about 4 inches of steel that are welded and riveted throughout these buildings, they're made to be very strong. They just simply don't collapse. They're made so that they don't collapse. And even those really seriously damaged smaller buildings around the foot of buildings 1 and 2 in the World Trade Center had to be pulled down through controlled demolition, whereas Building 7 made the same way, very conveniently just collapsed into its own footprint at almost free fall speed. And this is, of course, how fast the other towers fell too, the 2 big ones, at almost free fall speed. So let's look at the next video that we have, see what we have. Okay, so go full screen on that and let's watch it.
Hello? Hello? running on the left, on the left, on the left, where the smoke is. I'll help you, I'll help you.
Come on.
Left
Come on,
arm.
come on, come on.
Okay, right now.
Come on, guys. Anybody coming? Get your ass over here now.
Okay, that was a very interesting and short clip. It's part of a much longer clip. That film was taken by some people who were on a small boat in the Hudson River on 9/11. I've actually never seen the fall of one of those twin towers from that particular angle. If you'll notice, the sound of the fall starts at the exact same time as the explosion, which means that the actual sound of the explosion of the fall happened before the explosion started, when the tower starts to collapse. In other words, the sound alone is proof that there were explosives used, because it takes the visuals will start happening before the sound. You can see what's happening before the sound will hit you. Just like if a bullet hits a wall next to you, you're just going to hear the pock, and then you're going to hear the bang, because sound travels relatively slowly through the air. So normally, if the sound of the collapse was merely caused by the collapse itself and not by an explosion, then you would have seen the collapse start and then heard it. But instead, you see the sound and the collapse start virtually at the same time. So, and of course, there's all kinds of evidence that there were other explosions that happened before the actual collapse, and some of those explosions were in the basement. There's all kinds of evidence that that people were killed in the basement of the Twin Towers from explosions, which would make sense if you had controlled demolition going on, because you need to weaken the structure first. And also, there was an explosion in the lobby. We have videotape, which I haven't shown you today, but there's so much out there. But they have video film, I don't know if it's video or film, of the lobby of, I'm not sure if it's building 1 or 2, but you can see huge, heavy panels broken off the walls, the big plate glass windows broken out. And this is before the tower fell. Now, why would that be? How could that possibly have happened? Unless there was some kind of a big explosion that happened in the vicinity of that lobby, which is on the floor, on the bases, on the ground level, or just above the ground level. And of course, the airplanes hit the Twin Towers way up near the top. That's where the damage was. That's where the fire was. And you have survivors of the Twin Towers talking about that the elevators were destroyed. The elevators were on fire. The stairwells had fire. All the way through, there was explosions happening in the Twin Towers that had nothing to do with the fire caused by the jets. And people say, well, you know, the jet fuel melted the steel. Well, I'm sorry, but jet fuel cannot melt steel. And not only that, but as soon as each airplane hit each tower, one for each tower, that huge fireball that you see in all the videos, red, hot, burning, giant fireball, what do you suppose that is? That itself is the jet fuel that is burning very quickly. It's exploding. And jet fuel is essentially kerosene. So you cannot say, and many people have tried to use this argument, that the jet fuel weakened the towers and made them collapse. But it wouldn't have time. It blew outward. It was blowing up into the air, all the jet fuel. So it was gone within a matter of a second or two after the tower was hit. Instantly. Boom, instantly gone. And how would you have time? And then what you have left burning would be the airplane, the seats of the airplane, whatever was burnable on the airplanes, whatever was burnable in that floor that each airplane hit. That would be, I suppose, the carpets, the office furniture, things like files, anything burnable, the drywall, the paper on the drywall would burn. But you don't have that much. And you have thick clouds of black smoke. And you have orange fires. The color orange of the flames that are shown coming out of the windows of the World Trade Center where the planes hit indicates the temperature of that particular fire. And a lower temperature fire will give you orange flames. A hotter temperature fire will give you the blue flames. And so this alone shows you that those flames were not hot enough to melt steel because they're orange. If you think about it, in your gas stove at home, you have the burners that are made of steel, and you have, what color flame do you have coming out of your gas stove underneath those burners that's directly on your steel of your grid, your little grids that you hold your pots on, or for that matter, the pots themselves. That's a blue flame, and that blue flame does not burn the steel. It does not cause the steel to weaken. It does not even make the steel glow like a really hot steel will do before it starts to gradually, lose its strength and sag. It doesn't even get hot enough to make the steel of your on your grid work, your burners, get red, much less melt them. And you're talking about something that's against the laws of science here. Asking people to believe that enormous steel girder network melted and caused a pancake collapse. I mean, it's just ludicrous to even think of it. Okay, let's go on to the next one. All right, so this is a longer one. This is the actual beginning of 9/11 Mysteries, an excellent beginning. Okay, let's roll that.
Bringing joy to children.
For my baby.
Rub my seasoning.
My name is Brad, and I'm a conservative Republican. Last summer, I happened to come across a video on the internet about the World Trade Center collapse on September 11th. As a kind of demolition hobbyist, I downloaded it and watched it. The title was Painful Deceptions by a guy called Eric Hufschmidt. The video made me angry. I was determined to prove the maker of this video wrong. I purchased DVDs about 9/11 from CBS and PBS Nova, including one made by the Naudet brothers. These were considered the official videos. And after watching them carefully and researching thousands of websites and archives on the internet, literally not sleeping for an entire week, I realized that the official story, not Eric Hufschmidt's Painful Deceptions, was unprovable, unsubstantiated, absolutely wrong. What you're about to see is information you should already know. Our news reporters, government, and media should have made all this material available to every one of us. Ask yourself why you've never seen it on TV.
This is as close as we can get to the base of the World Trade Center. You can see the firemen assembled here, the police officers, everybody.
On September 11th, we learned that 4 passenger planes were hijacked and taken radically off course. Within an hour, 2 of the planes had flown into the enormous steel towers of the World Trade Center, creating fires and eventually toppling them. Dazed by the news, the American public soon believed the fires in the towers had burned so hot they caused the steel frames of the buildings to give way. A myth developed, fed by official sources through the media to a bewildered audience.
So when it was attacked again, he immediately...
Elements of the myth. The impact of the airplanes, gallons of burning jet fuel, steel melting, the buildings failing and suddenly imploding. In a mere 10 seconds, 110 stories hurtled earthward, pulverizing into dust.
We ran to the building and went into the...
Right from the start, on the street itself, the official story was born.
Come out of nowhere and just scream right into the side of the Twin Tower, exploding through the other side. And then I witnessed both towers collapse, one first and then the second, mostly due to structural failure because the fire was just too intense.
The myth bled into the FEMA report and was echoed by the experts.
It was the combination of the impact load doing great damage to the building, followed by the fire, that caused collapse.
John Skilling and Les Robertson were the structural engineers who designed the streamlined steel frames of the Twin Towers in the 1960s. Because a wayward Army bomber flew into the Empire State Building in 1945, the towers were built with skyscraper crashes in mind.
The airplane we were envisioning was the largest airplane of its time, flying slowly and low, lost in the fog. We designed the buildings to take the impact of the Boeing 707 hitting the building at any location.
But the aircraft that hit the towers was a Boeing 767, heavier than a 707, fueled for a transcontinental flight and traveling fast.
707s and 767s are comparable. The maximum takeoff weight of a fully loaded 707 is almost 334,000 pounds. As airplanes only carry the fuel load they need, the smaller model 767s that struck the towers were not, in actuality, maximally fueled or close to their maximum takeoff weight. As for the heat of the fires, listen to the radio communications of these New York City firemen.
We got tanks outside the pockets of fire. We should be able to knock it down 2 lines. Where you go that? 78th floor. Look, we got tanks outside the pockets of fire.
Isolated pockets of fire. 2 water lines to knock them down. FEMA's executive summary relays that much of the fuel in the planes, jet-grade kerosene, was consumed by the initial fireballs and the following few minutes of fire. It then tells us that the burning jet fuel spread between floors and ignited the building's contents, causing more fire and generating heat. This was somehow enough to bring down the tower's 47-column steel core, 236 exterior columns, and thousands of steel trusses all at the same time. Watch the towers smoking in the aftermath of the plane strikes. If you have ever tried to light a wood fire, you will know that smoking logs tell you the fire is not burning successfully. Smoke is the sign of an oxygen-starved fire. The Twin Towers stood for over an hour, smoldering but not flaming. During that time, thousands of people were evacuated by way of the stairwells. Others, trapped by debris, stood in the smoke-filled windows and signaled for help. In fact, the towers did what they were built to do.
The building was designed to have a fully loaded 707 crash into it. That was the largest plane at the time. I believe that the building probably could sustain multiple impacts of jetliners because this structure is like the mosquito netting on your screen door, this intense grid, and the jet plane is just a pencil puncturing that screen netting. It really does nothing to the screen netting.
The towers were built to withstand 140-mile-an-hour gusts produced by winter storms. Anyone in them on a windy day could feel them swaying. The single impact of a jetliner was no more of a blow than the continued battering of a hurricane.
I was just putting my stuff away, and all of a sudden we heard a loud crash, and the building started shaking, kind of moving like a wave.
New Yorkers were stunned 1 hour later when the first tower fell.
To the best of my knowledge, the considerations of the fuel in the airplane in terms of an explosion or a great fire was not considered. Now, we were not responsible for that aspect of the design.
Imagine building expressly for airplane impact, but never thinking of the fuel. Never before in the history of the world has a steel building collapsed due to fire.
I have not seen, until recently, a protected steel structure that has collapsed in a fire.
True infernos have raged hot and long in steel-framed buildings, but not one of the buildings ever came down. In 1975, the World Trade Center's North Tower suffered a nighttime fire that flamed for 3 hours, spreading vertically from floor to floor. It burned twice as long as the fires of 9/11 without even a hint of a building collapse. In February 2005, the Windsor Tower in Madrid, a skyscraper undergoing reconstruction, sustained a 20-hour fire. This is what was left, a standing building strong enough to support a crane.
Really good piece of the documentary that will help you understand what happened on that day, what really, truly happened on that day. And this is the scientific and it's very objective and unemotional look at something that we should probably feel extremely emotional about it, since 3,000 people died on that day. And since that day, as a direct result of 9/11, over 1 million people worldwide have died due to the attacks on them, and really they're dying to this very day. Thousands of people are dying and have died as a result of the Obama and before him the Bush drone program, and it shows no signs of abating. And this is all supposedly in revenge for the 9/11 attacks. This doesn't even take into account the people who have been exiled out of their countries. They've run from the warfare as a result of the invasions, the illegal invasions by NATO and the United States in Iraq and Afghanistan. And it does not take into account those people who will die, and this will happen for hundreds or if not thousands of years into the future as a result of the depleted uranium that is polluting and toxifying the soil, the water, the air in Iraq and in Afghanistan, to name only 2 countries. But nowadays, wherever the U.S. military and other military governments other military forces go in, they routinely use depleted uranium, which is very toxic and causes birth defects in the soldiers themselves as well as in the civilian population of those countries. And those, in other words, the direct result of 9/11 is an ongoing ecological disaster for the planet. And who is responsible? Who is responsible? You saw Larry Silverstein interviewed, and he explained that they pulled Building 7. Well, of course, it takes a long time and very specialized teams, companies. There's only a couple of companies in the world who have the expertise to learn how to pull a building. And because those charges have to be set throughout the building, and it's all done with a computer, very carefully coordinated. You don't go into a burning building and actually set it up for controlled demolition. Okay, let's watch the last little clip we have. Go ahead and full screen on that and start it.
At a hotel in Arlington, Virginia. It shows the explosion that followed the crash of American Airlines Flight 77 into the Pentagon, but the video does not show the airplane. The video's existence was disclosed in 2002. A hotel manager says it was confiscated by the FBI. It was just publicly released as the result of a lawsuit.
Yeah, just a brief note on that. Still, we have not seen any credible evidence that a 767 jetliner crashed into the Pentagon. The hole that was made was only about 16 feet across, right near the base of the Pentagon. In other words, the jetliner would have had to skim across the lawn within 20 feet of the ground without landing, and of course this is really against the laws of physics. A huge jetliner can't do that. There's a pull effect with the air, and it pulls it down into the ground. It can't get that low without crashing into the ground. It's literally impossible, and it doesn't even address the efforts that would have had to have been made by these very inexperienced pilots to actually do this incredible loop. This, not even a jet pilot, very experienced, could have accomplished what those pilots, those Middle Eastern terrorist, supposedly pilots, could have done. So the whole thing is very, very suspect. So just to give you a recap, we have to, if you have not looked into what happened on 9/11, you really owe it to yourself, to your children, to your grandchildren, and to history to look into what happened and decide for yourself. Don't take my word for it. The information is all out there, and people are continuing to do research. Very dedicated journalists and scientists and pilots and people from all walks of life, military people, have all come out and denounced the lies put forward by the U.S. government to explain what happened on 9/11. There are some criminals who are still at large and still alive who are responsible. They need to be arrested, indicted, brought to trial, and punished for their crimes against humanity. So that's all for today, and have a great weekend and sleep well, friends.